Hello, welcome to Secure Talk, your trusted source of information on the latest threats, trends, tools, and technology related to cybersecurity and compliance.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Secure Talk. Secure Talk is brought to you by Adequest, your cybersecurity compliance partner. My name is Mark Schreiner, and I'll be your host of this episode of Secure Talk. Today, we have the CEO and co-founder of Very Good Security joining us, Mr. Mahmoud Abdelkader. Mahmoud, how are you today?
Great. Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's a pleasure to have you on the show. How was your long weekend?
It was interesting. So first, it was relaxing. I definitely enjoy, long weekends, which is really rare recently, because I used to not enjoy them because there used to be a lot of work there. But it is also a lot of work. It's a different type of work. My daughter actually just turned 14 months on 1st of June, and that's completed 14 months, and so yay. But also she's a little bit of a handful right now. She's starting to walk, so my weekend was spent putting gates up so she doesn't walk up the steps or go down the steps and stuff like that.
Yeah, it's a challenging when they're young. They're mobile. They can walk, they can run, they can grab stuff, but they don't really reason very well. And you try to explain why they shouldn't grab the scissors and run with them, and they're like, just give me the scissors,
Yeah. So the key has been to not have her around scissors, right? Like the key has been mostly around just giving her just little things to play with. Actually, a really cool trick is my chief of staff, Dottie Colantano, told me is to empty a bottom drawer and put some fake empty Tupperware in there.
Oh yeah,
and so
they love that
stuff like that. Yeah, so basically it's like a decoy for her,
Decoys and gates. I like that.
Yeah.
So let me ask you this. As the CEO of a company, are you able to unplug on a 3-day weekend?
Especially, I don't know how other CEOs can unplug in this environment. I think they have to. I think we have to. I think right now it's just so competitive, and VGS specifically is basically creating a new category. There's a lot of people who have entered into the space that come after us that I don't think CEOs can really unplug without a little bit of paranoia, right? And so what are you missing if you plug? I think it's important though, right? Especially mental health is very important. But I think, when I'm there with my family, I'm definitely half there, right? I'm there physically, but maybe mentally my mind is going somewhere. But one thing that my wife and I started thinking about was, hey, turn off the phones. And I realized that the only reason why I have my phones on me, the phone on me at all times, is because I'm researching ideas. Right. And so I started carrying a notebook where I just jot down my ideas, but also try to solve the puzzle or problem that I'm running into in my mind. And then when I get to a computer, I have some time, then I start working on. But yeah, that's basically. There's no real way to really unplug, especially like I said, in this economy, in this environment, in the threat landscape that we're facing right now, and the competitive nature of where we're at. Just lots of stuff that's happening that you need to keep up on, and it's I'm not going to say it's a joy, but it is.
And I'm curious because you've worked previously as a CTO, and now you're in a CEO role. And when you mentioned, I think you said paranoia about missing something or something happening while you're at the watch. Which one were the pressures different? I mean, with CTO, are you more worried about a breakage or some type of security event versus in a CEO role? I mean, you're thinking about everything, I suppose, but
it's mostly around alignment, right? My CEO's job is actually hire the best people, keep money in the bank, and kind of leave people to do what they're doing, right? And so, but I think that's a best case scenario. The interesting scenario then becomes, and the problem becomes okay, well, what if you have to, realign an organization or realign some folks, right? And so you'd have to figure out how to align them to get them on the same page. And one of the problems becomes, it's not something that you can make a pull request to or solve this issue really quickly. You have to figure out a way to strategically give them and empower your teammates so that you can focus on really going towards the goal, right? So it's really aligning the organization and then figuring out kind of are people taking on too much? And there's all this subtext that's happening that you're trying to read into as a CEO. As a CTO, the computer kind of tells you what to do. And when you're when your customers are complaining, they are giving you an alert or they're sending you an email or something like that. And so really then it becomes more about like, very customer facing. But I would say you're not sleeping at night because of just security. You're not sleeping at night because potentially you might have gone down or the service SLA has been broken or potentially the architecture is not going to work or you're I think as a CTO that was kind of my anxiety.
Sure.
The CEO's anxiety has shifted to organizationally, how are we achieving the vision that we set out to achieve, and are there any roadblocks that we have to unblock? And that has been kind of an interesting switch of it's a very similar problem, like I would say
Right.
it has like the same heuristic, same body, but it's a much different solution, right? A much different puzzle that you have to solve. So it's
Sure.
very
Well, I like your idea of carrying around a notebook. I have random thoughts come to me all the time, and the phone is amazing because you can just sit there and go like, oh, and get the answer, right? And then you can go down these different rabbit holes. It's not always the most appropriate way to do it, though, is there on the spot, because you lose focus on whatever your task is at that time. And it could be just spending time with your family, but whatever that is. I actually do something similar. I have my notepad, and I'll just take a note or send an email to myself, and then I have some dedicated time each day where I allow myself to go down those random rabbit holes. But before I was just losing focus all the time because it's so easy. And then I think, how did people do this? How did you find information? Even back when I was growing up, you go to the library, or who would you ask, right? And it's so easy right now. So it's pretty cool. Well, hey, before we go any further, why don't you tell us a little bit about Very Good Security? I mean, you're the CEO and co-founder. I think you're probably the best positioned person to kind of describe what it is you guys do.
I think I appreciate that. So I'd love to tell you the story, but I think ultimately I'd like to, before I tell you the story, I think I'd like to preface it with some context of like why something like a Very Good Security existed, so the folks out there can kind of understand what happens there. So, the too long didn't read, right? Pitch, right, is basically VGS allows a business of any size to enter a new vertical or acquire additional revenue streams or, empower customers by enabling transformations on their data without worrying about the ever evolving and ever changing landscape of compliance, privacy regulations, security issues that they have to worry about, right? So it lets them extract value from their data without having to worry about all the details that go into protecting that data. And that's very important because the reason we hold data in the first place is to try to extract value from it, right? Data, right, presumably is gold, although now I think 10 years ago, the better way to think about it is data as an asset, and now it's become a liability. Like, go ahead, you were going to say something?
Oh, I was just going to say it can be, like you just said, a liability. So
depending
on what you're doing with it, why you have it, are you just sitting on it because, hey, we got to have all the data? I mean, that's I heard somebody, make the analogy of a bunch of toxic waste in your garage, right? I mean, would you want to keep it or get rid of it? So.
But I think the ultimate way to think about it is if you believe genuinely that the best way to protect data in the first place is to not have it, right? Which is a very common thing in security. We think about it, if you don't really need it, then you don't need to store it, right? But if you think about it, the whole concept of storing data was basically what a large product market, all the different products that went into the market to solve this problem, like how to store a significant part of your data and extract value from it. In 2010, big data was all the rage, right? Hadoop, like Spark, Flink, and continues to happen today. But ultimately, what we realized is that it's not just you, right? It's also the environment that you're operating in, right? If consumers want you to value their data properly and respect their privacy, at the end of the day, they're the ones that really matter because you're the one that has to, they're the ones that have the money to buy your product, right? The second thing is the government regulations that gets passed, right? Ultimately, that's something that, 10 years ago, we might have not really paid attention to that. But now we're like, oh, the government regulations being passed are changing the way we do business today because they've ultimately overnight changed this thing that used to be an asset into now a liability onto our books, and there are fines associated with it. And so that's really the problem, is like we've dug ourselves into this hole. And I think ultimately that's the real problem. And the real problem is like we need this data to extract some kind of value from it. We might not even need the data, like you're saying, it's toxic waste in your garage. But one of the things that you wanted the data for in the first place was to extract value from it, right? And so
Right.
what VGS does is it tries to address this problem in the same way that you and I interact with money today. It's a little difficult about this analogy, but it's the easiest way to explain it. Imagine before you had like Visa and MasterCard and credit cards and all these different things to settle and clear behind the scenes. When you and I exchange money today, I just push a button, right? And money is, and
Sure.
the value of money is exchanged to you. I don't physically move currency, right, anymore. It's basically very rare for me to have cash today, but I move the value of cash all the time, and we do it in as a part of our daily lives, and we move on, right? 100 years ago, that was unheard of, right? You
Right.
couldn't. Like, how does that work, right? And what requires you to do this? Like, are you like something that I feel and see is something that I own? Now, if we step back and then try to understand kind of like what we're doing with data today, we've basically built data and secured it in the same way that we secured money physically. But the problem is data copies every time you exchange it. Money doesn't, right? So fundamentally, the way we've been going about this problem of how to secure data is just wrong, because today, in today's environment with the internet and the connectivity that we have today, data is exchanged, which literally means data is copied. And as a result, securing the perimeter or securing the data is just a function that's effectively gated by how many copies can be done on this data, right? Or where can this data be copied to? That's what data today means. VGS is changing this equation. It's basically said, okay, what if we invert that relationship that we have with our data by pushing our compute to it instead of pulling the data in to compute on it? And it's a very weird way to think about it, but imagine an Excel sheet. You have to, everybody has loaded in a CSV with some numbers to like run a sum operation or a sum function on the Excel sheet, right? You have Excel as a program physically on your machine, right? Or on the cloud somewhere. You have to physically transport this data into Excel just so you can run the sum, the sum function, so that you can say, 1 10 times is 10, right? Well, imagine if you shipped the sum function to the data instead and let that operate on it. And that's the inversion that we're talking about. Instead of pulling the data and putting it into Excel so that you could run the sum function on, you just ship the sum function to the data itself, and that's operated on the data. So the response that you get back is 10. It's the same answer, the same value, but the issue is that I didn't load or make a copy of the data to load it into Excel, right? And then ran the sum operation. I still did the sum operation, but shipped that logic to the data instead of pulling the data in and operating on it. And that's the fundamental difference of VGS. It's just shifting that and inverting that, relationship that we're so used to. Because what happens is, what's the problem? And this is the best part to tie it back into money again. What's the problem with ATM withdrawals today? The minute that money is withdrawn and there's some kind of loss to that cash is gone forever. That's the problem, right?
Right.
But if you lost your card, you just call a company and you get a card back. So why can't we have the same relationship with data in the same way that we have a relationship with our money today? We push value and instructions to operate on the data instead of moving the physical data. And that's the real key here. The key, and then what that does is that has a dramatic turn of events in the way you think about, like, and just a dramatic scope reduction on what you need to do to secure your data in the first place. By changing that relationship that we have with data and operating on it, not only can we extract value quicker, faster, and safer, but also we've minimized the amount of touch points that data needs to have. And so the copies that the data needs to do have effectively been minimized to zero. And that's what we really feel like VGS is on. That's what we call our zero data mission. And that's the product. The product lets you
zero data emissions. That's awesome.
No. Zero data. That's funny you said that. It's zero data mission, but sure,
mission. I thought you said emissions, but because it kind of fits with,
it works both ways.
Yeah, exactly.
Right, it works both ways, right? We call it zero data mission. But that is the key. The key is, can you separate value of data from physical custodianship and physical protection of data? VGS has 500 plus customers now. We've proven that this is real. This is live. This is something that people can do today, and we haven't really come across use cases where the zero data mission hasn't applied, unless it requires like machine learning or something like that, where you actually need to like inspect the data, in which case we have other solutions for this. But the point is, about 80%, 90% of the problem is solved just by pushing the logic to the data
Okay, so
instead of
you gave a very basic example of an Excel sheet. Can you give maybe add some color or put some meat on the bone of a real life
sure.
problem you helped a customer solve?
Sure. Let's take Texas Capital Bank, right? It's a case study that we have on our website, verygoodsecurity.com, right? So Texas Capital Bank, like a public bank, it's one of the biggest banks in the United States. And they needed to issue a new corporate card very quickly. So like, remember what I said before, it allows businesses of any size to enter new verticals and acquire additional revenue. Okay, well, let's just break that problem down. Put yourself in their shoes. If you had to issue a new card, a new corporate card, how would you do it today? Well, ultimately, you're going to need to partner with a card issuer, right?
Hmm.
Ultimately, you're going to need to be able to get all your security posture in place to be able to connect that card issuer. How fast do you believe if you did this yourself today, you'd be able to do this? I'll tell you, that all their partners came back and said like 2 years at least before you go to
Wow.
market. They wanted to go to live. They wanted to go live within, I think it was like within 3 months, 4 months, right? And so just by chance, the person they were speaking to at the company that they were working with was like, "Oh, I had another client. There's a vendor that they were talking. I had another client that did this, that needed this, and they were able to do it very quickly. You should talk to them and reach out to them." So they didn't even know about us, right? They ran all these RFPs. They broke it down, and they basically want to accelerate this timeline. And so they went and talked to this client, one of our customers, and one of our customers was like, "Oh yeah, we don't see any of the data, but we still run our entire card issuing programs through it." And so as a result, we don't have any of the data, so a lot of the compliance problems don't apply to us anymore. And so what happened was they reached out to them. They were like, "Just use this company, VGS." They reached out to us, and we ended up winning that account post their RFP process, right? And so
Hmm.
the reason why is because the conversation shifted from how do I secure my data to what's the business outcome I'm trying to achieve. Do you see what I'm saying? So now Texas Capital Bank issues corporate cards without ever needing to see the data. They file all the regulatory requirements, they file things to the IRS, they file the report, they parse all the
So
transactions that
where's the data? Where's the data though? Are you hosting
that's
the data? Are you the
yeah,
processor then? Okay, so
yeah.
so VGS is actually a processor, and you're saying like we will do the what you need done with the data in a compliant way, and you're kind of, I wouldn't say you're outsourcing the compliance risk to us, but you're kind of they're kind of trusting your organization to manage that or process the data in a compliant manner, and because they're not compliance specialists, you
Yeah,
are you.
it's not even compliance specialist, right? Like think about Visa, for example, right?
Okay,
Visa's not a compliance specialist either, right?
right,
Visa Visa's a network that moves instructions that ends up moving money, right?
right,
VGS is very similar. VGS lets you move and enables you to move instructions to move and operate on your data without having to physically move your data. And so as a result, you inherit a lot of our compliance and security posture that we spent millions and millions of dollars on, right? And so
right.
now, obviously, when you compare it to like Google, who spends millions, you're like, well, you're not as secure as Google. That's not true. But the question becomes, it's like, the whole point of this is like we have a massive budget allocated to securing and protecting your data in the same way that if you have a problem with your heart, you typically will go to like a cardiologist, not a dentist, for example, right? And so so VGS is specialized in protecting data and letting you maximize its value. That's our mission. Our mission is actually protect the world's information, right? And maximize its value while it's on VGS than if it's not on VGS. And so how do you maximize the value? Letting you operate on it, right? So VGS, yes, it does hold the custodian burden of the data in the same way that your bank holds your money today, right?
Sure.
It insures it the same way that the bank insures your money today. But the key is when you and I go and open up a new checking account, I don't go into an account to be like, is it secure? I kind of take that for granted because it's trusted infrastructure. What I want is, can you maximize the money that I deposit into your bank account? Can I use ATMs without fees, right? Stuff like that. Can I have an e-banking or web banking solution, right? Bill pay, things that add value once I deposit my money into like, interest, can I have better interest or better savings account? All of these things are what consumers do today to partner with their banks. What VGS is trying to do is it says, hey, if you put your data on VGS, we will give you that equivalent of all these nice things for your data. So you can issue cards super fast. In fact, you go to our website, you'll see that Visa put out a quote. One of our companies, Unit Finance, was able to issue cards directly And 50% of the time, how much money would that have gone in terms of loss, protection, overhead, just for you to be able to issue a card? And that's the point. VGS makes the data security part a non-issue so that you can go focus on their business today. And that's a real thing. This is happens all the time with companies. They just typically are holding data to achieve an outcome. For example, another example, you are going to apply for a loan, right? You give all of this sensitive information. I give my mother's maiden name, my last 4 digits, my tax forms, my credit card score, my credit scores, social security IDs. So then they want to verify it. What do? They just put it all in some form, and they hit submit, and they send it to Experian, TransUnion, LexisNexis, whomever it is, right? Okay, well, what's the difference between Experian, TransUnion, and LexisNexis? What's the difference? Not much. I mean, yes, right. Plus or minus 10, plus or minus 20, which could matter, right? Which could matter. But the question that I'm trying to understand is like, what's the real difference? It's not like one's going to be like, oh, you have terrible credit, and one's going to be like, you have excellent credit. It's most likely all going to be within some range. And that's the thing we're trying to say is like, what are you trying to do with that data? Oh, you're just trying to run a credit score? Cool. Run the credit check. Run the credit check. Don't worry about the details of how you're going to get that data to Experian or TransUnion. Just run that credit check so that you can issue loans better and faster. And that's because that's ultimately what you're in the business of, not in the business of, let's say, securing the data just so that you can send it to one vendor. Does that make sense? And I think that's the thing that VGS has really done, is it stepped back and it was like, what are you trying to do with the data? Let's figure out a way to expedite that instead of solving for these point solutions that end up it becomes a cat and mouse game, right? And everybody, and that's really the thing that, Peter Berg, who's our vice president of business development and strategies, constantly says. He says, hey, everyone's trying to sell you a better mousetrap. VGS says, get rid of the mice. And that's the whole idea.
Interesting. Let me ask you, when you engage with your customers, how do you help them to determine which data they want to have you help them with? And then also, once you've decided on that, I'm assuming you have, because these days malware is such a huge concern for everybody. I'm sure you have some type of solution that addresses that concern. So can you speak to those two questions?
Yeah, absolutely. So, what's the one protection against malware / ransomware? What's that one protection that you have there? The way it's basically better backups, right? Better backup. Right? That's the one protection that you have there, because the idea is that, hey, if that data is being locked in, just figure out a way to restore all that information so that you can go about your business, right? Another way you can really rephrase that is separate your data and lock access to it unless absolutely needed, unless you absolutely need it, right? Because the whole point of this, that's how malware works. Malware works because it says, I'm going to shut or basically figure out a way to like spy on how you're using your data today. But if you separate the metadata from the data storage, from data in use itself, it's a very effective way to stop malware from actually affecting your business. Because let's say they try to steal data that might be on your endpoint, which is a computer, right? Let's say they try to figure out a way to do that. What ends up happening? Effectively, they're just stealing synthetic aliased data that is useless. And unless it's authorized to go through VGS, and this is the best part, and there's a policy that when you put in that policy says that it will only reveal, when you decide to say reveal the data, VGS must asks you to whitelist where or to whom that data will be revealed to. So you'll say it will only be revealed to data that's egressing to Experian.com. Right. And so if you went to like Experian.org, it won't reveal, and so you're just going to be sending fake data. So we put all these different pieces of controls as the data is in use, so that if you try to exfiltrate it or try to use it in an unauthorized manner, you can have actions that say, yes, this is an unauthorized use case and stops it from happening, or it can substitute it with a canary token, for example, and it will phone back home as it goes through the entire, what they call dark web or whatever, right? Whoever's egressing this. For example, you might get fake credit card numbers that are real credit card numbers, but they're only generated to basically ping back to VGS to say, hey, this is a canary that says that, this piece of data is a real number, real card number, but it's used, it was stolen. Do you
Mm.
see what I'm saying? And so
Yeah.
then that's really cool. And that's the part that VGS wants to do, is it allows you to pull, it's very similar to what I do with my daughter, decoys the data so that what you do is, you don't see that you're actually exfiltrating decoy data. And because we have so many stringent policies on how it gets revealed, that's kind of the way we protect against it. But to go back to your first point, which was, well, how do you help customers, identify what data that is? That's actually a really interesting point. For the too long didn't read version of that is a variety of ways, but a more sophisticated version is it turns out more companies, when they use their data, are using very similar APIs that other companies on VGS have used before, right? Like, for example, if you're running this background check on Experian or TransUnion, any of these credit unions, it's not like they're creating an API specific to you, right? They're creating an API that you're using all the time, or Stripe or whomever. VGS has built a repository, a constantly learning repository that says, hey, I've seen that data go to that destination before. This data contains this schema, so this part of the data must be sensitive. And so it just uses deductive reasoning to understand, kind of like, because it's seen that data, and it applies it transitively to all the ways that you have seen. Now, we don't need to know what the physical data is. We just need to know the structure that the data was composed in to then understand if that was real sensitive data or not. Does that make sense? And so that's very important. We don't need to know the real data.
Right.
We just need to know the schema that you're composing. And so those are really easy ways to umbrella simple things that make identifying that data very easy. And so I've seen a lot of solutions like scan your database, scan your schemas. That's never going to work because that's at rest. Who knows what at rest is? It's all about data in use, because then we know frequency of data, who is using the data, how is the data being used, where's it going, why is it going there? It starts to give us a lot more context to reduce the problem space of let's find every piece of sensitive data that's sprawled across our enterprise, which I think is a very hard and intractable problem.
No, it makes sense. And to be honest with you, that's what I've seen most often is that, the solution would say, let's go and do a network scan to find out what data you have. And I always wonder, are we missing something, and by putting the emphasis on what data is in motion, and then identifying different structures that flag and say, and maybe this is a simplistic example, but here is a bunch of numbers that are formatted like social security numbers. We might want to flag that, or credit card numbers, or thing that, any kind of PII, that you can flag it, and then force your customer or the operator to enact some type of policy. What do you want to do with this data? Data, is it structured like this? Do you want to? Yeah. So that's pretty cool.
So that's what DLP will do, right? But the thing is, it's not about just finding the sensitive data like this. I think the key, though, to be able to make the better decision is, for example, let's say you've seen a formatted 9-digit number with 2 dashes in it, right? Some courts have very similar court cases that look like this. So is it a court case or is it a social security number? So you don't know. But if it was being sent to, like, let's say ssn.gov, what's likely? It's very likely that it's not a court case. It's very likely that that's an SSN number. And that's the whole point of VGS, right? VGS combines the intent of the use of the data plus the data schema itself, right? To then say a better decision so that we can avoid having these system operators step in and say, oh, this is not data, this is classified, because that's a real difficult problem. The problem that we're trying to solve is, when you use the data, we'll know exactly what it is, right? We'll know, because we've seen it before. We've seen that if you send it to SSN or IRS.gov, it's most likely, very high probability, that it's an SSN. Does that make sense? And so there's a lot of these really interesting things that DLPs can't provide because they sit only and they have no context. But once you start adding with the data in use plus the data in motion, you start really solving this problem in a very holistic manner. Does that make sense? So
Absolutely.
I just want to clarify.
Hey, let me ask you this. I mean, you're based down in Silicon Valley area. Is that where you're at?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One of the challenging things that I've seen or we've seen is that a lot of times startups are so focused on product, sometimes they neglect some of the other areas of their business. And we're a cybersecurity partner with Microsoft, so I mean, we're looking at things through that context, right? Um, I mean, do you notice something similar in terms of the startups sometimes not paying enough attention to? What are your thoughts on?
I I could tell you, big part of why we started this company was because I wanted to use a significant amount of products, and I just didn't know how these folks would, you know, what their security postures were. Right? I was
Right.
like, they still, and I'll tell you, I remember, I was at a hackathon, and someone had a pretty successful site that received funding. I'm not going to tell you who it was, and this person was very, was like, oh, you want to see? It was like a task list, and they're like, oh, I was like, that some of these famous people were on it, and they're like, oh, you want to see their tasks? And I was like, oh my gosh, what a violation of privacy! Like,
Right.
and so, and then at that point, I realized very quickly that, like, if you have to ship something fast, the first thing you're gonna do is like, does it even work? Do people even want to use it? And then once you use the product, then you're like, okay, I have to tack on security. There's a bunch of these companies that have recently started up that do like checklists in a box, like SOC 2 compliance, right?
Sure.
And so, and I just think we do that too. But one of the things that we want to make sure is people realize, like, hey, the checkbox is not real security. So if anything, we encourage the vendors who are receiving the SOC 2 to like really drill in and say, listen, just because you check this box doesn't mean you're secure. All it means is that you've done the bare minimum to build an environment where there's security there, right? Security starts at a DNA, and there's no one, what's the word for it? Like, there's no like one layer. It's multiple layers that you have to put in there, and it really needs to come from. And the second thing is, you step back and be like, well, what is security for? Oh, it's to give us some kind of trust, right? So yes, absolutely believe it. But I also think it's a little bit of the piracy problem. Goes back to your question of, like, why do startups, kind of neglect security in the beginning and stuff like that. I think it's because it's a usability issue, right? When Hulu and Netflix came out and people started paying for it, we started seeing, oh, it's not a piracy problem, it's just a usability problem, right? And so that's really important, right? Because it's very important to realize, like, just like Amazon made it so easy for you to just build a company in the cloud or whatever, right? And then all these companies start following. VGS has a very similar approach, right? So, in my payments routes, the companies that I sold before, the payments company, I look at Stripe as like a really interesting example. Their simple to use APIs have exploded e-commerce online. They're
Sure.
directly correlated, right? And so it's like, so I think it's a usability problem. I'm not gonna say design, but usability, right? So usability is very key. So ask yourself, why don't we have very usable products for companies to build their next company on or next product on very quickly? It's supposed to be super simple, get out of my way and just help me get to where I need to go quickly. That's not security today. You go look at a security vendor, talk to a salesperson. Then they go, and I run a sales organization myself, and I look at what we do, and we're like, will these people, give us more money? They go and give them more, because you're talking about bottom line or top line or whatever. When you think about increasing revenue, you're not going to focus on the company that's not starting out tomorrow. You're going to focus on the companies that are established, that have budgets to pay you. In fact, it's called BANT, right?
Yeah.
Budget, authority, need, and timing, right? Okay, budget is number one. Well, what if you're a company that starts out, you're not going to have any budget, right? So does that mean you basically build a prototypal product without any security? That's what it means, because nobody's going to sell you a security product. And that's where we really saw the difference with VGS. We were like, okay, we're going to build a product that developers just add into their products without having to change their current workflows. They just drop it in there, right? And so that's really the product. So we took a lot of really interesting influence from Cloudflare. Cloudflare is a very, very popular site and a lot of popular services. And we were like, can we do something where we can basically just embed it in there? And that's the part that really VGS is focused on. So we're one of the few security companies in the world. I think we might be the first that actually, like, when you go to our website, it says sign up, put your credit card in, don't talk to anybody, right? Why do you think we did that? Because we were like, we access to security and privacy tools and compliance tools should literally be something that you should be just as easy as you using an AWS console, right? Which is, not the best, but the point is like it's very easy for you to self-service.
Sure.
Does that make sense?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's a common perception that security and people and CISO, the role of the CISO, for example, is very technical. It doesn't necessarily have to be. In fact, a lot of times it's more like program management and just figuring out what is the appropriate level of security that we need to support our business, maybe even to add value. I mean, you can turn a good security posture into an asset. So but having tools that, like you said, that you can just go and turn on, that seems to be pretty cool.
It's the different ICPs, right? The different ideal customer profiles. If you're selling to the CISO and they're not technical, then don't sell them a technical solution. They're not going to try your product out and like develop on it, right? And so, but what they're going to want to do is they're going to want to know, how does it fit into my product, right? Or how does it fit into my organization? The developer is going to want to know, how does it fit into my product? How do I get it up and running pretty quickly? How do I test it, right? And then the compliance person is going to be like, how do I monitor my risk? These are the questions these folks are asking, right? They're just trying to ask these simple questions. But the thing that I think is really powerful is that VGS has something coming up very soon, and it will basically be a sales enablement posture, right? And so what it will do is it will help you kind of like generate all the materials that you need that typically roadblock you in sales. And so so again, you notice what VGS is trying to do is just trying to get you to achieve your business outcomes faster. Whatever it is, I don't care what it is, right? You're selling a social network for cats versus a journalist, journalist sites or whatever, and then or medical device. It doesn't matter. The point is, you're trying to build something that will have to touch sensitive data. I just don't believe you can build a site today without sensitive data. Sign-up forms now are cool. In some jurisdictions are considered sensitive data. So my point is, it's touching the entire application stack, right? And so CISOs, privacy folks, compliance folks, CTOs and engineering leaders, they all need to be able to step back and stop thinking more about, what was this encryption? What's the GCM mode? Like, is it Gauss counter mode on AES? Like, or is it 256 versus 120? This is a red herring. You want them to say, does this data need to touch my systems for me to achieve my business outcomes? If it doesn't, then and if it does, I bet you there's a way to do it with zero data. But and so the point becomes like, should you really need to store the data, or should you just focus on the outcomes you're trying to achieve and turn the narrative that way? And I think that's the thing that VGS really is trying to focus on today.
Awesome. Well, hey, I've enjoyed this conversation. I could probably take up another. We've been talking for about 40 minutes now. I could probably keep going. But let's just kind of wrap things up. What you mentioned that you have this sales enablement service or product that you're going to be releasing. What else do you have going on? And if people want to find out more information about VGS, what should they do?
Yeah, for sure. So a few things. So we're actually going to do something really cool. Stay tuned on that. But verygoodsecurity.com or at GetVGS on Twitter. Some of the cool things is I think we're going to build some workshops where we'll pick random open source applications and show how easy it is to drop VGS in there and make a pull request live. And we might like Twitch live stream it, for example. And so this is the kind of stuff is like, we want to be able to, really or go through a mock sales motion where we can respond to an RFP that's anonymized, for example, very quickly. So this is kind of the stuff that we want people to do. It's not necessarily webinars, because I think this might be a little boring, but I think some of the things are like, we want to actually show, here's use cases that you go through every single day that you might not realize VGS can help you with, right? And so that's really the value. Like, how can we extract more and more value from the data when it's on VGS than if it's not on VGS. And that's, if you think about it, that's the mission. The mission is to maximize the value of the data.
I'd like to see a demo like that, a real life demo on a real life scenario where you can show how easy it is and then what the results are. No, that'd be pretty cool.
Yeah, so people could just sign up on that. But yeah, for sure. Thank you for that.
Okay, so that'll be available on your website. I'll put links in the description of the podcast and stuff. So, hey, I've learned a lot. You give me a lot to think about when you started off at the beginning explaining the kind of the paradigm shift in terms of pulling data and using it versus sending the function out to the data. I kind of felt like I ate a pot brownie or something, but after some time there, it all made sense. And it's you've got me very much intrigued. Hey, really enjoyed our conversation, and I would like to have you come back on sometime and talk more about your experience of leading a company, because you've been at the helm for about 5 years.
Yeah. I've been learning every single day. It's a new challenge, right? It's a new puzzle every single day, and that's really, I'd love to tell you a little bit more about, like, what does it look like if you're starting something new, or what does it look like if you're 5 years in, 6 years in. I'm happy to share that experience for sure.
That'd be great. Well, yeah, wish you the best in 2021, and we'll talk soon. Thanks, Mahmoud.
Likewise.
Cheers.
Speak soon. Thank you so much.
Hello, welcome to Secure Talk, your trusted source of information on the latest threats, trends, tools, and technology related to cybersecurity and compliance.